Today, we are going to look at the most terrifying animal attacks ever in history. From a volunteer handler in Texas, bitten during a rattlesnake roundup, to a backpacker in India, whose tent became a predator's trap. It was July 21st, 2016, at a palm tree farm near Palangkaraya in Indonesia. The morning was quiet and humid. The air felt heavy because it had rained the night before. By evening, something terrible would happen that would shock everyone who worked there. Reggie Peters was 32 years old and came from Britain. He worked as a farm advisor, helping to improve the water systems for growing palm trees. People knew him as a quiet man who was good at his job. He liked to walk around the farm by himself, writing down problems in a small notebook. Reggie had been working in Indonesia for 4 months. During this time, he took hundreds of photos of bugs, birds, and animals. He loved learning about all the different creatures that lived around the farm. The workers noticed that Reggie never scared away snakes or lizards. Instead, he would get down on his knees to watch them closely. On that day, Reggie went out to do his regular work. The rainy season was coming soon, so he needed to check the water ditches. If these ditches got blocked, the crops could flood. That morning, he packed his notebook, a measuring tape, and his phone to record notes. Around noon, 2 workers named Amir and Lutfi saw Reggie near a muddy ditch. He was kneeling down and writing in his notebook. They made jokes with him about the huge snakes that local people claimed to see near the water channels. Reggie laughed and said he would love to see one of these big snakes up close. The workers later said he didn't seem worried about their warnings at all. He thought their concerns were just old stories that weren't true. The palm farm was huge, stretching for miles. Rows of palm trees were separated by narrow water channels. The ground was soft and muddy from the recent rain, making some areas very slippery. Small flying insects called dragonflies moved over the water, and mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were chainsaws cutting in the distance and frogs making low croaking noises from the ditches. The heat made everything feel still and heavy. Large snakes called reticulated pythons live in this area. They are some of the biggest snakes in the world. They can grow longer than 20 feet and weigh more than 200 pounds. These snakes hunt by hiding and waiting near water for animals like pigs or dogs to come close. Sometimes they even attack people, though this doesn't happen very often. In this part of Indonesia, the snakes have moved closer to where people work because their natural homes have been destroyed. Local people knew to stay away from these snakes, and some carried long knives for protection when working near water. By late afternoon, Reggie still hadn't come back to the camp. Amir started to worry and walked toward the last place where he had seen Reggie. The farm was almost silent, except for the constant buzzing of insects. That's when Amir saw something that made him freeze with fear. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel. A few feet away, there was an enormous python lying in a coil. The snake's middle section was hugely swollen, as if it had eaten a very large animal. Amir stood completely still, then started shouting for Lutfi and the other workers. Within a few minutes, 5 men were standing there, watching the snake as it slowly began moving toward the bushes. The swollen middle part dragged heavily on the ground, leaving a deep track in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, trying to poke at the snake from far away. The python made a loud hissing sound and opened its mouth wide, showing its curved teeth. It coiled up to defend itself. The snake was massive, reaching about 15 feet long. None of the workers were brave enough to get close to it. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately called the local police. While they waited, the men kept watching the snake carefully. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something inside had moved. One worker noticed a broad, uneven bulge pressing against the snake's skin, a shape too large and irregular to be a pig or dog. The men stepped back, horrified by what they were seeing. When night came quickly to the farm, they brought flashlights to keep watch. When the police arrived, they decided they had to kill the python. It took several minutes and many people hitting the snake with long knives and poles before it finally stopped moving. The workers stood quietly as police and local villagers prepared to cut open the snake's belly. The process was slow and disturbing. As the knife cut through the pale belly scales, mud and fluid mixed together on the ground. Inside the snake was Reggie's body, curled up and covered in a layer of slime. His clothes were soaked and torn. One of the workers recorded what happened on his phone. The video started spreading through local messaging groups that night before being quietly removed. Reggie's notebook and phone were damaged by moisture, but were found near the edge of the water channel, covered in mud. His body was placed in a sealed coffin and taken to Palangkaraya before being flown back to Britain. The farm management quietly put up new warning signs near the water channels, telling workers not to travel alone. The following week, Reggie's cabin was cleaned out and his belongings were shipped home to his family. It was March 15, 2014, at Ranthambore National Park in Rajasthan, India. The air was cool and quiet after a very hot day. The camping area had turned off all its lights hours earlier, so everything was dark except for some moonlight. Inside one of the canvas tents, 2 travelers were sleeping. They didn't know that a snake had quietly crawled under the tent entrance. Claire Johnson was 26 years old and came from Melbourne, Australia. She worked as a graphic designer but had quit her job to travel around Asia for a whole year. She had been saving money for almost 2 years to pay for this trip. She wanted to see as much of the world as possible before going back to work full-time. Claire's friends back home knew her as someone who liked adventure, but was also careful. She always looked up information about the places she stayed, carried medical supplies with her, and wrote a detailed blog so her family could follow her travels. Visiting Ranthambore was something she had really wanted to do. She had always dreamed of taking photos of wild tigers. That day, she had gone on a safari tour and was excited because she got to see a female tiger near a waterhole, even though it was far away. She was staying at a cheap eco-camp outside the park gates. She was sharing a tent with Laura, a German student she had met on the train from Jaipur. The camp was basic but clean, with tents that had zippers and were built on raised wooden platforms. Claire was very neat about keeping their tent organized. Every night she would shake out her shoes and make sure the tent entrance was zipped up properly. That evening was cool for March, so she zipped the canvas door all the way closed before they went to bed, leaving only a small opening for fresh air. The camp was located next to dry grassland where thorny acacia trees and tall grass created areas of shade. At night, insects made buzzing and clicking sounds, and sometimes they could hear peacocks calling in the distance. The ground around the tents was hard dirt covered with leaves and small rocks. This kind of environment was perfect for small reptiles that hunted during the cool hours before sunrise. Spectacled cobras are common snakes in Rajasthan. You can recognize them by the circular pattern on the back of their hood when they spread it out. These snakes usually stay away from people, but in early morning they sometimes come into human areas looking for mice or rats to eat or seeking warmth. Adult cobras can grow up to 6 feet long and have poison that affects the nervous system. This poison is strong enough to kill a person within hours if they don't get proper medical treatment. Local tour guides always warn campers to check their bedding and shake out their clothes before sleeping, because snakes sometimes crawl inside without being noticed. That night, sometime after 4 in the morning, Laura woke up to a soft rustling sound near the bottom of the tent. She was still half asleep when she grabbed her phone and turned on its flashlight. The light beam showed something that made her freeze with fear. A spectacled cobra was coiled up just a few inches away from Claire's sleeping bag. The snake had its head raised slightly. Before Laura could do anything, Claire moved in her sleep and stretched out her leg. Her bare ankle touched the snake's body. The cobra bit her twice very quickly, putting both fangs into the soft skin just above her heel. The bites happened so fast that Laura almost didn't see what occurred until Claire suddenly moved and made a gasping sound. Laura screamed, which woke up everyone in the camp. Claire sat up and grabbed her ankle, where 2 small holes from the snake's teeth could be seen. Camp workers ran to their tent carrying flashlights. They could see the snake as it crawled out of the tent. Claire's breathing became fast and shallow, and people who saw her said her eyes looked strange and glassy. When she tried to stand up, her legs gave way as if they couldn't hold her up anymore. Her voice was very quiet when she said her legs felt like jelly before she fell back down onto her sleeping mat. The camp didn't have any anti-venom medicine to treat snake bites, so the staff put Claire in a jeep to drive her to the hospital. Laura went with her and pressed a scarf above the bite marks to try to slow down the spread of the poison through Claire's body. The drive to the nearest hospital took more than 40 minutes on bumpy roads. Halfway to the hospital, Claire stopped responding when people talked to her. Her skin became pale and felt cold and damp. When they finally reached the small rural clinic, the medical staff told them there was nothing they could do to save her. Claire's body was taken to Jaipur later that day. Her parents were contacted through the Australian embassy. They asked for her body to be cremated following the local customs. The camp management decided not to close down their business, but they hired a local snake expert who started giving weekly talks to new guests. These talks taught people how to check their tents properly and where to keep lights on at night to avoid problems with snakes. Laura eventually went back to Germany, but she later wrote a detailed story about what happened on a travel website. Her story warned other backpackers to always check their tents, bedding, and shoes when staying in areas where snakes might be present. This post was shared quietly for years as a serious reminder to travelers who thought sleeping close to nature was romantic without understanding the real dangers. This incident shows how important it is for travelers to take safety precautions seriously when staying in wilderness areas. Even experienced and careful travelers like Claire can face unexpected dangers when wild animals and humans share the same spaces. The tragedy serves as a reminder that proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when traveling in remote natural areas. It was September 9th, 2015. in a small lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico. Jorge Cruz was 42 years old and had worked in this lime orchard his whole life. He got up before sunrise every day to check the water systems, cut tree branches, and teach his oldest son how to tell if the fruit was healthy or sick. People in the village knew Jorge as someone they could count on. He was the type of person who would fix broken carts for his neighbors and lend them tools without expecting anything back. Jorge had a habit from when he was a child. He liked to work without shoes. He said this helped him feel the ground better and move faster when he had to climb the lower tree branches. The afternoon was very hot, and the air felt heavy. The sun beat down on the leaves so hard that nothing seemed to move. This orchard had belonged to the same family for many years. On this particular day, the normal work routine would be interrupted by something that changed everything in just one moment. Jorge was working with two neighbors, Raul and Mateo. They were picking limes on the far side of the grove where workers had made a pile of cut tree branches after cleaning the area recently. The three men were making jokes about how hot it was as they moved between the low tree branches, putting bunches of limes into bags. Jorge was wearing his wide hat pushed back on his head and an old, faded shirt. He reached for a low branch and shifted his weight to pull the fruit closer to him. The ground in the orchard was hard dirt covered with cut leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches provided cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. There was a patch of wild plants that marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops made long shadows that moved across the ground. It was very quiet, so small sounds like fruit falling to the ground or clothes rubbing against tree bark were easy to hear. The men were focused on their work and conversation, not paying attention to potential dangers around them. A type of poisonous snake called the Terciopelo, Bothrops asper, locally known as the nauyaka, lives in Central America. These snakes are thick-bodied and usually grow to be 3 to 5 feet long. They have very dangerous poison that destroys skin and muscle, causes severe bleeding in the area where they bite, and can affect blood clotting and blood pressure throughout the body. These snakes blend in perfectly with fallen leaves and often stay completely still until someone steps close to them. When they bite someone, it usually causes extreme pain and the area swells up very quickly. That morning, neighbors had been talking about seeing more snakes since the recent rains. Jorge's wife had told him to wear boots while cleaning brush and debris. The pile of cut branches where they were working was a temporary heap of trimmings, exactly the kind of place where snakes like to hide. Raul later said he had warned Jorge to be careful, but Jorge waved off their concerns and said he would work quickly. When Jorge shifted his position, the snake attack happened instantly. The fer-de-lance burst out from the leaves and bit the skin just above his ankle. Raul and Mateo heard Jorge make a short, sharp cry of pain and saw him pull his foot back while grabbing at the wound. Before the other men could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood spotted the dirt where his foot had been. The pain hit Jorge immediately and was very severe. He bent over double and dropped the fruit he was holding. Within just a few minutes, his lower leg began to swell and the skin started to look bruised and discolored. He began throwing up and sweating heavily, and his face became very pale. Raul quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they kept Jorge's leg still by making a splint from a broom handle. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, then pushed the cart toward the dirt road that led back to the village. The trip to the clinic was bumpy and slow. Dust covered Jorge's damp skin, and he became confused, speaking in broken words and going in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse looked at his swollen leg and noticed that his pulse was weak and his blood pressure was low. The clinic had basic medical supplies but no anti-venom, the special medicine needed to treat snake bites. The staff used their radio to call the regional health center asking for help, but the nearest supply of anti-venom and a properly equipped ambulance was hours away. Jorge's condition got worse. He became more and more disoriented, and his breathing became shallow. The medical staff could not help him get better. By evening, Jorge had died at the clinic despite their efforts to stop the bleeding and help him breathe. Raul said they tried to kill the snake, but it disappeared into the thick plants. Jorge's flip phone and work notebook were found and returned to his family, though they were stained. In the weeks that followed, a traveling veterinarian came to the village. He brought a small supply of anti-venom and taught basic training to local people who could respond to emergencies. He showed them how to make splints from available materials, how to apply pressure bandages, and explained when and when not to use tourniquets. The villagers cleaned up and clearly marked the brush pile area. They put up a simple pole marker where Jorge had been bitten. His wife began wearing his wide-brimmed hat during harvest times, a visible reminder of his absence. The lime trees continued to produce fruit, and from that time forward, each harvest season began with a brief, serious reminder to all workers about being careful and staying safe. It was May 2nd, 2018, when the air over the Cross River felt heavy and still. Mina Balogan was 19 years old and had just returned from university 1 week earlier. She spent most of her afternoons at the river. People knew Mina for her lively personality. She often brought her cousins to swim with her, even though the older people in the village warned them that snakes were more active during the dry season. Mina didn't think their warnings were important. She believed that nothing dangerous ever happened in the shallow water. On this day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her for a swim. They left their sandals and shirts on the rocks before walking into the cool water. Mina had plans to go back to school soon. She talked about wanting to start a small community project when she returned, something that would teach younger children how to swim safely. She had always thought of the river as a place full of life, not danger. Because Mina felt so comfortable in the water, her cousins trusted her and followed her without worry. The afternoon was the kind where every sound seemed to carry far. The river's surface looked calm and reflected the cloudless sky, but local people often said the water was never truly quiet. Something was always moving underneath. The part of the river they chose was wide and shallow, with muddy banks that fishermen liked to use. The air was humid, and dragonflies flew just above the water's surface. Even though it was a bright day, the thick plants on the other side of the river made long shadows over the deeper parts of the water. African rock pythons are the biggest snakes on the continent. They can grow to be more than 20 feet long. These snakes hunt by staying very still until an animal comes close. Then they bite with powerful jaws before wrapping their body around their prey to squeeze it until it stops breathing. While attacks on people are rare, these snakes are known to catch and eat goats, dogs, and even large animals like antelopes. During the dry season, they often hunt near water sources that are getting smaller because that's where animals come to drink. Earlier that week, an older fisherman had warned Mina's uncle that he had seen a very large python lying in the sun on a log nearby. Children had been told not to swim until the rains came and made the water levels higher, but Mina insisted that the shallow bend where they swam was safe. Mina had been in the water for almost an hour, playing and floating on her back, when one of her cousins saw something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they thought it was just a tree branch caught in the current, but when it curved and moved silently across the water's surface, fear spread through the group of children. The shape moved forward quickly, showing the patterned body of an enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking speed. Its jaws locked onto Mina's side before its body wrapped around her. Her cousin screamed as the snake's coils got tighter, forcing the air out of her lungs. The water became violent and choppy as Mina fought against the snake, then went still as the python dragged her into deeper water. The children ran as fast as they could back to the village, screaming for help. It took several minutes for the men to grab their long knives and run to the river. By the time they got to the river bend, the snake was still moving around in the water but had pulled Mina deeper under. The men went into the water and cut at the python over and over until it finally let her go. When they pulled her onto the muddy riverbank, she had clearly been underwater for several minutes. Her skin was cold and pale, and her lips were a deep blue color. The villagers tried pressing on her chest and blowing air into her mouth, while others stood back in shocked silence. When they pressed on her chest, water came out of her mouth and nose, and mixed with the mud under her head. Someone recorded the desperate scene with a phone. The sound of shouting and rushing water mixed with the noise of long knives hitting the snake's body. Their efforts continued for several minutes, but there was no sign that she was breathing. Mina's body was placed on a mat near the water as the villagers gathered in silence. For weeks afterward, the river bend remained empty. Fishermen refused to throw their nets there, calling the area cursed. The village learned that even familiar places could hide unexpected dangers, especially during times when wild animals were more likely to come near human areas looking for water and food. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on new meaning as the community worked to prevent similar tragedies from happening again. It was June 10th, 2013, in Sweetwater, Texas. The fairground was extremely hot under a clear sky. Heat rose off the tarps and metal bleachers, turning what should have been a routine demonstration into a day where small mistakes would have serious consequences. Samuel "Sammy" Price was 38 years old and had been a volunteer snake handler at the annual Rattlesnake Roundup since he was a child. He did repair work around town and showed up every year to handle snakes for visitors. People respected him because he was steady and had years of practical experience. He taught new volunteers and preferred to show them hands-on rather than just talk about it. He believed that experience could help reduce danger. Local people trusted Sammy because he rarely rushed his work and would correct sloppy technique without making a big deal about it. This year, the festival had attracted a bigger crowd than usual, and the organizers had made the schedule tighter. Sammy had moved between snake pits all morning, answering questions from visitors and spending a lot of time in the sun. He had skipped eating a full breakfast to keep the demonstrations running smoothly, and he felt lightheaded. He thought this was just from the heat and being tired. His co-workers told him to rest and drink water, and he nodded in agreement but kept working. When someone asked him to do one more live demonstration that afternoon, he said yes, because he saw it as part of his responsibility. The roundup used shallow pits for displaying snakes. These pits were surrounded by temporary barriers, with a raised platform for the announcer and folding chairs for people to sit and watch. The smells of fried food and car exhaust mixed with dust in the air. There were shade cloths and water containers near the pits, but the layout was cramped and kept volunteers in the sun. People watching leaned against the fence with their phones held up high, recording every movement. The setup was designed so everyone could see clearly, but this reduced the space for handlers to move around and limited opportunities for both people and animals to cool down. Western diamondback rattlesnakes are strong pit vipers that are commonly 4 to 5 feet long. Their poison causes tissue damage and bleeding, and can trigger shock throughout the body if someone receives a large dose. Large adult snakes can strike with surprising reach. When under stress, a snake may twist in unexpected ways, changing how a handler is gripping it and exposing unprotected skin. Even skilled handlers can get bitten when a snake is already upset, or when heat and repeated handling increase its stress level. Earlier that day, organizers had warned volunteers about taking turns and limiting heavy snake handling during the hottest part of the day. A small accident in a morning demonstration had prompted them to formally remind everyone to take breaks and drink water. Medical personnel were standing by with IV fluids and anti-venom available on site. Sammy heard the instructions and agreed with them, but the crowd and the busy schedule drew him back to work. He took a heavy western diamondback snake from a colleague and stepped into the pit wearing a leather glove and carrying a snake hook. He lifted the snake using a practiced motion. For a moment, the crowd relaxed because Sammy's steady presence made onlookers feel calmer. Then the snake's body shifted under stress and twisted sharply. It lunged forward, and its fangs went through the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot through his arm. He signaled that he was okay, but his face became red, and sweat formed on his forehead. For several minutes, he kept talking to the crowd, but his breathing grew shallow and he asked for a chair. The bite area swelled quickly, and discoloration appeared, spreading down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling moved past his elbow toward the shoulder, the skin darkening with mottled bruising as tissue damage progressed. Volunteers moved him to the first aid tent once it was clear he could no longer stand. Paramedics applied pressure to slow the spread of venom, started IV fluids, and pushed the first vials of antivenom. His breathing turned shallow, his skin cold and blotched with bruising. Despite fast treatment, his blood pressure collapsed, and his pulse faded. Witnesses later recalled the frantic attempts to keep him conscious, as medics called for an airlift that never came in time. Friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions after the event. They invited regional medics to review emergency procedures and practice drills. A younger relative of Sammy's began helping at the pits, learning to prioritize taking turns and staying hydrated over putting on a good show. The festival board documented the incident and created a checklist for demonstrations: maximum handling time, required breaks, and a fast evacuation plan to the nearest ambulance access point. It was March 15, 2016, in the dense rainforests of southeastern Cameroon, where towering mahogany trees stretched endlessly under the humid canopy. Hidden among thick jungle vegetation near the Sangha River, a converted logging camp sat isolated on 50 acres of abandoned concession land. The property had once housed a legitimate primate research station under proper government permits, but those days were long gone. Erica Winslow, a 52-year-old former wildlife photographer from America, had been operating this facility illegally for 3 years after her research permits expired. What she refused to surrender was Caesar, an 18-year-old western lowland gorilla weighing 375 pounds. Erica's demanding personality and entitled behavior had made her notorious among local officials and village chiefs. She constantly complained about wildlife inspections and refused to acknowledge that her research permits had expired. With no formal primate training, she relied entirely on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods she found online. Her social media posts showed increasingly erratic behavior as she attempted to discipline Caesar using intimidation tactics. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened territorial aggression for weeks, throwing branches at visitors and damaging the reinforced walls of his enclosure. Local villagers reported loud chest beating throughout the night, and Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter for the past 2 weeks, defying Erica's commands entirely. Cameroon's Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife had been building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays had prevented immediate action. Warning signs had been mounting for months as Caesar's behavior deteriorated under improper care. Western lowland gorillas are among the most powerful primates on Earth, with adult males possessing the strength of 10 humans. Their massive hands can exert crushing force, while their canine teeth can tear through flesh and bone with devastating efficiency. Despite their generally peaceful nature in the wild, captive gorillas under stress can become unpredictably violent, especially when confronted with perceived threats to their territory. Caesar had been showing classic signs of psychological distress from improper captivity conditions and inadequate social interaction. These magnificent creatures require specialized care that few private individuals can provide. On that fateful evening, Erica's frustration reached its breaking point. Caesar sat defiantly in the center of his enclosure, completely ignoring her increasingly loud commands to enter his night quarters. Determined to assert her dominance, she grabbed a makeshift electric prod, fashioned from old logging equipment, and unlocked the heavy gate to his 20 by 30-foot reinforced pen. This decision would prove fatal. As she stepped inside wielding the electrical device, Caesar's behavior shifted instantly from passive resistance to explosive aggression. The 375-pound silverback charged across the enclosure with terrifying speed. His massive body slammed into Erica's chest with the force of a small vehicle, launching her backward into the metal fence. The rusted metal cut deep into her back as Caesar's enormous hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets with crushing pressure. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. Caesar's powerful jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it completely with a wet tearing sound. Erica's screams echoed across the empty rainforest as the gorilla grabbed her right hand, which still clutched the makeshift prod. His bite force of over 800 pounds per square inch crushed 3 fingers at the knuckles, severing them entirely. The enraged primate lifted Erica's body off the ground and shook her violently like a rag doll. Her shoulder dislocated with an audible pop as Caesar slammed her face first into the concrete floor. Her nose shattered on impact, creating a growing pool of blood beneath her head. The gorilla then grabbed her right leg with both massive hands and twisted with brutal force, snapping her femur bone. The jagged fracture tore through muscle and skin. Caesar positioned himself over Erica's prone form and brought both fists down on her ribcage with devastating impact. 6 ribs cracked simultaneously, the broken bones puncturing both lungs. Her breathing became shallow and labored as blood filled her chest cavity. For his final attack, Caesar grabbed Erica's head between his massive palms and squeezed with methodical pressure. Her skull cracked like an eggshell, and brain matter leaked onto the concrete floor. Her body went completely limp as life left her. The silverback sat calmly beside the lifeless body for the next 4 hours, occasionally grooming blood from his hands. Local villagers discovered the scene the following morning when the usual sounds of morning feeding never came. Cameroonian authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal operation, while wildlife officials worked to safely relocate Caesar to the Limba Wildlife Center. The incident sparked renewed debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers posed to both operators and local communities. Government agents seized all remaining animals from the property within days. Erica's family released a statement expressing their grief while acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. It was July 22, 2017, along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River, where towering pine trees cast long shadows across the rushing water. The remote wilderness area, known for its crystal-clear streams and abundant wildlife, had become the perfect destination for the Price family's annual camping adventure. Landon Price, a 34-year-old construction foreman, had driven his wife Sarah and their 2 young children, Emma and Jake, to this secluded spot 30 yards from the riverbank. What made this trip different from previous years was the modified dog crate secured in the back of their pickup truck, containing their most unusual family member. 2 years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout, a mountain cougar cub, from an exotic animal dealer operating in the gray areas of wildlife law. The construction worker's overconfident personality had convinced him that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their suburban home, telling curious neighbors it was simply an unusually large dog breed. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children began complaining that the animal's eyes looked mean during feeding times. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Scout had killed 3 neighborhood cats in the past month, leaving their partially eaten remains scattered around the property. Just 2 weeks prior, the cougar had escaped from his enclosure and stalked the mail carrier for several blocks before Landon managed to recapture him. Local game wardens had received multiple reports of unusual animal sounds coming from the Price residence, but bureaucratic delays had prevented immediate investigation. Mountain cougars are apex predators perfectly designed for stealth hunting, with powerful hind legs capable of propelling their muscular bodies over 20 feet in a single bound. Adult males can weigh up to 140 pounds of pure muscle, equipped with razor-sharp retractable claws and canine teeth designed to deliver precise killing bites to the neck and spine. Unlike domestic cats, cougars retain all their wild instincts even when raised in captivity, and their hunting behavior becomes more pronounced in unfamiliar environments where territorial instincts are heightened. Landon's fatal mistake came when he decided to release Scout from the transport crate to allow the 3-year-old cougar to stretch and explore the wilderness setting. He genuinely believed that Scout's upbringing had domesticated the animal's wild nature, treating the predator like an oversized house cat. As the family set up their fishing equipment near the water's edge, Scout emerged from his confinement and immediately began surveying the unfamiliar territory. His tawny coat blended seamlessly with the surrounding brush as his yellow eyes methodically scanned the area, cataloging every movement and sound. The 140-pound cougar's predatory instincts activated the moment Landon walked toward the river to fill their water containers. Scout's pupils dilated as he crouched low behind a fallen log, his powerful muscles coiling like springs. The cougar's tail began twitching in the characteristic hunting pattern as he calculated distance and timing with deadly precision. Scout launched himself through the air in complete silence, covering 20 feet in a single explosive leap. His powerful body struck Landon squarely in the back. The cougar's 4-inch claws immediately sank deep into Landon's shoulders and back, designed by nature to grip struggling prey and prevent escape. The predator's jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with surgical precision. Scout's canine teeth, evolved specifically for this killing technique, punctured the cervical vertebrae and severed the spinal cord instantly. The bite caused immediate paralysis from the neck down, leaving Landon completely unable to move his arms, with his face submerged and his body completely paralyzed. Landon drowned within 90 seconds. His body went completely limp as Scout maintained his grip, following millions of years of evolutionary programming that ensured prey was thoroughly subdued before feeding. The cougar then demonstrated another instinctive behavior, dragging Landon's lifeless body toward the brush line to cache his kill away from potential scavengers. Sarah grabbed Emma and Jake, rushing them to the safety of their locked truck, where they remained for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers arrived. Authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal possession of the mountain cougar, while wildlife officials worked to safely capture Scout. The incident reignited debates about private exotic animal ownership and the inherent dangers these predators pose to families and communities. It was September 8th, 2015, on a sprawling ranch property in South Texas, where endless mesquite trees dotted the landscape under a star-filled sky. The remote 50-acre estate sat miles from the nearest neighbor, providing the perfect isolation for Marcus Ellison's dangerous hobby. The 41-year-old oil rig worker had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility, complete with reinforced enclosures and feeding areas. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician who had grown increasingly concerned about their unusual housemate. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna as a 6-month-old jaguar cub from a black market dealer operating along the Texas-Mexico border. His thrill-seeking personality and desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols had driven him to spend his oil rig earnings on exotic pets. Luna had grown from an adorable spotted kitten into a powerful 180-pound predator. But Marcus genuinely believed their bond from her cubhood would protect him from any danger. Lisa had been pressuring him for months to surrender Luna to a proper sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. The warning signs had been mounting steadily over the past week. Luna had been refusing all food for 4 consecutive days, despite Marcus offering her favorite cuts of meat. The jaguar had begun territorial marking throughout the house, leaving her scent on furniture and walls in a clear display of dominance. Her obsessive pacing had worn visible paths in the dirt floor of her enclosure, and Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils remained constantly dilated, indicating severe psychological stress. Neighbors living miles away reported hearing strange vocalizations echoing across the countryside during the night hours. Jaguars are the third largest big cats in the world and possess the strongest bite force of any feline species, capable of crushing turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. These apex predators are perfectly designed killing machines, with muscular bodies built for explosive power and jaws that can exert over 1,500 pounds of pressure per square inch. Unlike other big cats that typically suffocate their prey, jaguars deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine, making them one of the most efficient predators in the animal kingdom. Even hand-raised jaguars retain all their wild instincts and can become unpredictably aggressive when stressed or challenged. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he decided to enter Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her 4-day food refusal, he believed their years-long bond would allow him to safely investigate her condition. He unlocked the gate to her 30 by 40-foot pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight to illuminate the darkness. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam as he approached. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand in what he believed was a gesture of comfort, Luna's predatory instincts took complete control. Her powerful muscles, coiled like steel springs, propelled her across the enclosure in 2 swift bounds. Luna's attack was swift and devastatingly precise. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest with the force of a battering ram, sending him crashing backward onto the concrete floor. His flashlight skittered away into the darkness as Luna immediately went for the kill. Her jaws locked around Marcus's throat with surgical precision, her canine teeth penetrating deep into the soft tissue. The jaguar's bite force of 1,500 pounds per square inch crushed Marcus's windpipe instantly, cutting off his air supply completely. Her teeth simultaneously severed both carotid arteries, causing massive blood loss and immediate drop in blood pressure. The combination of crushed airways and severed blood vessels caused Marcus to lose consciousness within 30 seconds. Luna maintained her throat grip for 3 full minutes, following her natural instinct to ensure prey was completely subdued before feeding. Once satisfied that Marcus was dead, she released her hold and began her feeding behavior. Starting with the soft tissue of his abdomen, her powerful jaws easily crushed through ribs to access internal organs. Her razor-sharp teeth made quick work of muscle and bone as she consumed her kill. Lisa discovered the horrific scene the following morning when she came to feed the animals. Luna sat calmly in the corner of her enclosure, methodically grooming blood from her paws and face. Marcus's partially consumed body lay in the center of the pen, a grim testament to the power of wild instincts. The incident sparked renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership in Texas. Marcus's family released a statement acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping wild predators as pets, urging others to learn from their tragic loss. It was June 14, 2018, in the suburban neighborhood of Homestead, Florida, where manicured lawns and palm trees created a deceptively peaceful setting. Behind a modest rental house sat an elaborate backyard pond system, 40 by 60 feet of artificially maintained water that had become home to one of nature's most dangerous predators. Brianna Ellis, a 26-year-old marine biology graduate student, had been using this location for her thesis research on reptilian behavior patterns. She shared the property with her friends Kevin Torres, a 27-year-old photographer documenting her work, and Amanda Walsh, a 25-year-old social media influencer who had rented the house specifically for its unique backyard feature. 2 years earlier, Brianna had rescued Brutus from a failing roadside attraction that was being shut down by authorities. The 9-foot American alligator had been malnourished and living in deplorable conditions, prompting Brianna's decision to relocate him to what she believed was a better environment. Her academic knowledge of reptilian behavior had convinced her that she could safely study Brutus while providing him proper care. Amanda's landlord remained completely unaware that a 350-pound apex predator was living in his backyard pond. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive during feeding times, lunging at the pond's edge whenever anyone approached. Despite her friend's protests, Brianna had continued hand-feeding the massive reptile, believing her scientific understanding gave her an advantage. Neighbors had been complaining about strange splashing sounds echoing through the night, and Brutus had been floating motionless for hours, displaying classic hunting behavior. American alligators are among the most efficient predators on Earth, perfectly evolved killing machines that have remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 800 pounds, with jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Their bite force is strong enough to crush a bowling ball, and their signature death roll technique can dismember prey within seconds. These apex predators are ambush hunters by nature, capable of explosive bursts of speed. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the Florida sun began setting over the suburban landscape. She had dropped her pH testing equipment into the deeper section of the pond earlier that day, and the waterlogged instruments needed to be retrieved manually. Despite Kevin's suggestions to use a pool net, Brianna insisted on entering the water herself to recover the expensive scientific equipment. This decision proved catastrophic, as dusk represents the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the pond, the water reaching her thighs, Brutus began his approach with the stealth that had made his species apex predators for millions of years. The 350-pound alligator moved through the water with incredible precision, his massive body creating no visible wake as he closed the distance. Brianna bent down to retrieve her submerged equipment, completely focused on the task and unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The alligator remained perfectly motionless beneath the surface, his eyes and nostrils barely visible above the waterline as he prepared for his explosive assault. The attack came with devastating force and lightning speed. Brutus launched himself upward and forward in one fluid motion, his massive jaws opening wide to reveal rows of conical teeth. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, and his jaw pressure of nearly 3,000 pounds per square inch crushed her femur bone instantly. Brianna's screams pierced the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll technique. The powerful alligator spun his body rapidly, using his muscular tail for propulsion, creating a whirlpool of churning water and blood. The rotational force generated by his 350-pound body tore Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood into the water, causing immediate shock. Before Brianna could escape, Brutus released the severed limb and attacked again with ruthless efficiency. His jaws clamped down on her torso, his teeth puncturing her ribcage and vital organs as he dragged her toward the deeper section of the pond. The alligator held Brianna underwater with relentless determination. The thrashing continued beneath the surface for nearly 2 minutes as Brutus performed his instinctive drowning technique. Brianna's body went completely limp as her lungs filled with water mixed with her own blood. The alligator maintained his grip until all movement ceased. Kevin and Amanda immediately called emergency services, but the responding dive team could only recover scattered remains the following day. Brutus had retreated to the deepest section of the pond with his kill. Local authorities launched a comprehensive investigation into the illegal possession of the dangerous reptile, while wildlife officials worked to safely capture and relocate Brutus. The incident prompted immediate changes to local ordinances regarding exotic animal ownership in residential areas. It was October 3, 2016, in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York, where towering evergreens stretched endlessly toward gray autumn skies. 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, a weathered log cabin sat nestled among dense forest, accessible only by a narrow dirt road. This isolated retreat had become home to Sean Gallagher, a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator whose career had ended in disgrace 3 years earlier. The bitter and increasingly paranoid man had retreated to this inherited family property after losing his rehabilitation license following a previous bear incident that left him with a permanent limp. Sean shared his remote sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He had illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it from certain death in the wild. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs had driven him to keep Kodiak despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that had grown increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions and his deteriorating mental state from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Kodiak had been systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture and clawing deep gouges in the wooden walls. The bear had become increasingly aggressive when Sean attempted to limit his food portions, displaying territorial behavior that should have served as a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against barriers as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful predators despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies, with adult males capable of reaching speeds of 30 miles per hour and possessing the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their powerful jaws can exert over 800 pounds of pressure per square inch, easily capable of crushing human skulls, while their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging but prove devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal creatures, most active during twilight and nighttime hours when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15 by 20 foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed by the bear's ongoing rampage. He stepped quietly into the room carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that made black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed by nature for climbing and digging. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, his claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his ribcage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the pressure, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. Local authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal possession of the black bear, while wildlife officials worked to safely tranquilize and relocate Kodiak to a proper sanctuary. It was March 22, 2015, on the outskirts of Houston, Texas. The air was heavy with early spring humidity, the kind that made sounds travel oddly across the flat land. Inside a chain-link enclosure behind a small ranch-style house, a Bengal tiger paced back and forth, tail flicking in restless arcs. Michael Torres was 41, a mechanic who worked 6 days a week at a small auto shop off Highway 6. He's known to be patient and loves tinkering, the kind of man who preferred engines to people. He had lived alone since his divorce 3 years earlier, spending his free time fixing up old cars and tending to the animals he collected. It started with ball pythons and iguanas, then a serval, and finally Raja, a 6-year-old male Bengal tiger he had acquired through a private breeder outside San Antonio. He kept the tiger in a large fenced enclosure on his property, reinforced with corrugated steel and heavy wire. Neighbors occasionally saw him through the fence, walking beside the tiger with a chain lead, talking to it like a companion. He believed Raja recognized his scent and tone, even claimed the animal would never hurt him. When asked by a friend why he took such risks, he would shrug and say it was about trust, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. That afternoon was overcast and sticky. The enclosure smelled of straw and damp soil. A friend, Luis Alvarez, had stopped by to borrow a socket wrench and lingered, watching as Michael carried tools toward the cage. Raja was pacing more than usual, tail lashing, eyes following every movement. Construction noise from a nearby property had carried through the air all morning, metal clanging, machinery humming. Michael said the tiger didn't like loud sounds but would settle once he started cleaning. Bengal tigers are apex predators, capable of crushing bone with a bite exceeding 1,000 pounds of pressure. Even those raised from cubs retain the same hunting reflexes, stalking, ambushing, and using sudden bursts of force to subdue prey. Male tigers can weigh more than 400 pounds and strike with enough power to shatter ribs. Their attacks rarely involve warning growls. Movement itself is often the trigger. Luis stood about 20 yards away, leaning against the fence while Michael opened the inner gate. He was replacing old straw, raking droppings into a bin. For convenience, he left the outer gate partially open so he could move a wheelbarrow through more easily. It wasn't the first time he'd done it. Luis mentioned that as he worked, Raja continued pacing, muscles tensing with each pass along the fence. Michael glanced up once, muttered something under his breath, and bent again to lift a shovel. Luis later told investigators he saw the tiger freeze mid-stride. Its ears flattened, body crouched low to the ground, tail twitching rapidly. A second later, Raja lunged. The impact made a hollow sound, metal and flesh colliding. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, knocking him flat on his back. He screamed, clutching his jaw, trying to crawl toward the gate. Raja followed in 2 strides and clamped its jaws around his neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclosure. Luis shouted and threw a wrench that clattered uselessly off the fencing. Michael swung the shovel's handle upward, striking Raja's snout once, but the tiger's jaws tightened. Luis grabbed handfuls of gravel and hurled them, screaming for the tiger to stop, but Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's limp body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja kept biting, dragging the body by the shoulder until it was half under a metal shelter. Luis ran for his truck and called 911. Dispatchers logged the call at 5:42 p.m. When deputies arrived 10 minutes later, they held position until animal control arrived with tranquilizer rifles. But when Raja charged the fencing, one officer fired his service rifle, striking the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter, exhaling once before going still. Michael's body showed extensive trauma, massive lacerations to the neck, chest, and abdomen. One arm had been partially severed, and his face was unrecognizable from the first strike. Investigators noted that despite his experience, he had no secondary containment system, no safety barrier or secondary lock. The open gate gave the tiger full access once the attack began. Animal control removed Raja's body that night. Michael's sister handled arrangements quietly, declining interviews. His funeral was attended by fewer than 20 people. Neighbors left flowers at the fence. The straw inside still stained dark where the attack happened. It was January 14, 2016, in Surabaya, Indonesia. The morning air hung heavy with humidity, the sounds of the city still distant beyond the industrial edges of the port. Behind a low row of warehouses, one lot stood apart, quiet except for the occasional clank of metal and the faint scrape of claws against concrete. Within those walls, a private experiment in control was nearing its inevitable breaking point. Ahmad Firdaus was 34, an auto parts importer who had built a modest business supplying components to repair shops across East Java. To most who knew him, he was patient and meticulous, the kind of man who stayed late to sort invoices or fix a broken compressor himself. But his fascination with exotic animals was no secret. Years earlier, during a trip to Flores, he had been captivated by the Komodo dragon. Its slow, deliberate movements, the quiet dominance in its stare. When an acquaintance from the wildlife trade offered him a hatchling, Ahmad accepted, paying in cash and never telling his family. Over the next 2 years, the reptile grew from a curious pet into a formidable presence. The pen Ahmad built behind his warehouse was solid, thick steel mesh reinforced with concrete at the base, but it was small, designed for a creature half its current size. He fed it chicken parts and goat meat, often by hand, proud of its trust in him. The few employees who had seen it warned him to be careful. One worker, Yudi Santoso, told him the animal was no longer tame, but Ahmad only smiled and said it knew him. That Thursday morning was still and overcast, the smell of diesel drifting from the nearby road. Ahmad had skipped feeding the previous evening, distracted by a shipment problem. By sunrise, he noticed the dragon's water basin overturned and filthy. Wanting to clean it before the day's work began, the gate creaked as he entered the enclosure. The animal was in the far corner, body motionless. Komodo dragons can grow up to 10 feet and deliver a bite strong enough to crush bone. Their venom contains anticoagulants and toxins that cause rapid blood loss and lowered blood pressure, weakening prey through shock. They are ambush predators, capable of bursts of speed despite their heavy frame. In captivity, they can become defensive or aggressive if handled frequently or underfed. Yudi, working in the front section of the warehouse, heard the clang of metal and a low thud. Then came a sharp cry. He dropped his clipboard and ran toward the back, rounding the corner just as Ahmad fell. The dragon had latched onto his right calf, its teeth sunk deep through fabric and skin. Blood darkened the concrete beneath him. Ahmad kicked out with his free leg, yelling for Yudi to get help. The dragon released, its head jerking back before it lunged again, jaws clamping down on Ahmad's forearm. Ahmad tried to pull away, but the animal twisted its head side to side, shaking loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole leaning by the fence and swung hard, striking the dragon's side. It turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking, tail whipping across the floor. When it faced him again, its throat bulged with each breath, saliva stringing from its jaws. Ahmad tried to crawl backward, leaving a thick smear of blood behind. The dragon lunged once more, this time catching his side just below the ribs. Its jaws locked, teeth sinking deep as it began to pull, ripping through skin and tissue. Ahmad's scream broke into a gasping rasp. Yudi struck again and again, shouting, until the creature finally backed off a few feet. Ahmad slumped onto his back, eyes open, one hand pressed weakly against the wound. The concrete beneath him gleamed dark red, the smell of iron thick in the humid air. Yudi ran to the pen gate, dragging a burlap sack from a supply shelf. He waved it near the dragon's face, forcing it to focus on the movement. The animal lunged toward the sack, and Yudi managed to pull the gate shut, locking it with trembling hands. He turned to Ahmad, who was still. The blood loss had been catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived from the nearest clinic, Ahmad was already gone. Later reports confirmed he had suffered multiple deep lacerations to the leg, arm, and abdomen, with significant internal bleeding. Death was attributed to massive exsanguination and traumatic shock from the venom's anticoagulant effects. Veterinarians who examined the animal later said it had shown signs of food aggression, behavior triggered when prey or a familiar handler moves suddenly during feeding. Police secured the warehouse and contacted Indonesia's Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The Komodo dragon, measuring just under 7 feet and weighing nearly 140 pounds, was sedated and transported to a wildlife rehabilitation center in Banyuwangi. Officials identified it as originating from Rinca Island, confirming it had been obtained through illegal trade networks. The story reached local newspapers for only a day before being buried beneath business and traffic reports. Neighbors remembered Ahmad as generous, the man who sponsored youth football games and handed out bottled water to delivery drivers. But within the warehouse community, the story circulated quietly, a warning told in fragments. Those who had seen the pen said he treated the dragon like a misunderstood companion, never realizing that to it, he was always prey. It was May 30th, 2014, near Bozeman, Montana. The morning was clear and still, the kind of quiet that hung heavy before the heat built up. A line of spruce trees framed the small animal sanctuary Mark Jennings had built from the ground up. Inside, one enclosure stood larger than the rest, its occupant pacing slow, deliberate circles. By noon, that silence would be shattered. Mark Jennings was 49. A former wildlife handler for film productions, he had left the industry in his 30s to start an educational sanctuary outside Bozeman. He ran school tours, wildlife demonstrations, and rescue programs for injured raptors and foxes. His pride was a 1,000-pound brown bear named Bruno, raised from a cub after being orphaned during a legal hunt in Alaska. To Mark, Bruno represented proof that wild animals could bond with humans through trust rather than fear. Bruno had been with him for nearly 12 years. He was intelligent, food-driven, and typically calm around people he knew. The enclosure was spacious, with reinforced fencing, a pond, and a shaded feeding platform. Mark managed most care himself, but occasionally brought in help. Erin Cole was one of those helpers, a licensed trainer who had worked with Bruno multiple times without issue. She followed protocols carefully, but admitted she always kept her distance during feeding. Mark trusted her completely, enough to call her one of the few people Bruno recognized. Brown bears of Kodiak lineage are among the largest terrestrial carnivores, capable of standing over 9 feet tall and delivering a bite force exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch. While generally solitary and predictable in the wild, captivity can alter their tolerance thresholds. Even long-term handlers face risk if food, scent, or routine changes. During feeding, aggression can surface suddenly, triggered by proximity or perceived competition. The sanctuary sat on rolling pasture bordered by pines. Early summer meant strong sunlight and restless animals. The air carried the smell of hay and meat from the storage shed. That morning, the enclosures were quiet except for the sound of pacing claws and the creak of metal gates. Erin arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal, 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark had left town the previous evening to visit his sister in Helena. Before leaving, he reminded Erin to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. The next day, he texted her around 10, receiving no reply. He assumed she was busy, then began his drive back. When he pulled into the gravel lot just after noon, he noticed the outer gate to the bear enclosure half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Seconds later, he heard screaming from beyond the fence line. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Erin was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open from shoulder to wrist. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The charge covered the distance in a second. The impact knocked Mark flat, the air leaving his lungs in a single sound. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, the claws sinking deep enough to tear through fabric and skin. Erin saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently. The bear adjusted its grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Erin's statement and evidence found inside the enclosure. The entire attack lasted under 30 seconds. Erin dragged herself backward, her hand leaving red streaks along the concrete. She made it to the open gate, pushing herself through the dirt until she collapsed near the outer fence. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she heard Mark's shouting stop abruptly, replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call placed by a neighbor who had heard the screams. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Erin survived after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Erin withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. It was August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp and the acacia trees still dripping. At Johan Botha's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. By mid-morning, tourists had yet to arrive, and Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before, one that would end differently this time. Johan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. Known for his confidence around big cats, he was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Johan would lead them into the outer section of the enclosure for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation mixed with business. To staff, Johan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full-grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johan insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms, when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-up evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behavior early and told Johan that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johan brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johan took a broom and bucket toward the enclosure, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera, recording casually as Johan approached the gate. Inside, Simba's pacing stopped. The lion's ears shifted forward, body low to the ground. Johan entered through the inner gate, closing it behind him, but leaving the outer one slightly ajar. He began sweeping near the feeding platform, speaking softly as he worked. The worker continued filming, fascinated by Johan's calmness. A few moments passed without issue, then Simba began circling. His tail flicked sharply. From the video and witnesses later interviewed, Simba's behavior changed fast. He lowered his head, crouching, then lunged. The impact knocked Johan forward onto the dirt, the broom clattering away. Simba's jaws clamped around his shoulder, driving him down. Johan yelled and pushed against the lion's muzzle with his free arm. But Simba shifted his grip, teeth sinking into the back of his neck. The sound of deep growling overpowered Johan's cries. Simba dragged Johan several feet toward the shade structure, his claws tearing through the man's shirt and skin. Johan tried rolling onto his back, kicking at the animal's chest, but the lion's weight crushed his ribs. The broom handle snapped as he tried to wedge it between them. Another employee ran toward the gate with a bucket, throwing water over the fence, but it only startled Simba for a second. Johan's voice faltered into short, gurgled gasps. Simba then lunged again, biting into his throat. The motion was efficient and final. The lion's jaws stayed locked as Johan's body went limp. The growls faded into rhythmic breathing. One worker ran to the control hut, slamming the gate alarm that signaled an animal emergency. The other, still holding the camera, didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. Rangers from a nearby property arrived within minutes, tranquilizer rifles ready. They found Simba standing over Johan's body. When the lion turned toward them, shoulders low and tail flicking, they fired 2 darts into his flank. Simba flinched. growled, and backed several steps before collapsing beside Johann. Once Simba was confirmed sedated, the team pulled Johann's body free using a canvas stretcher, his clothing torn and soaked through with blood. Autopsy revealed crushing trauma to the neck and severe blood loss. Bite measurements and tissue analysis confirmed a single sustained attack, consistent with defensive predation rather than aggression. The lodge was closed the same week. Simba was euthanized humanely after sedation, and his remains were sent to a veterinary pathology lab in Pretoria for examination. Officials classified the incident as preventable, citing complacency and poor safety protocol. His wife sold the property soon after, and the lion enclosures were sealed for good. It was October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama. Birds moved between the trees along the edge of the Reeves property. Behind the modest brick house, two large cages stood under a tin awning, built strong but weathered, their bars streaked with rust. Inside, two chimpanzees making sharp and uneven calls. Within the hour, a small routine would turn into something violent and irreversible. Linda Reeves was 58, a retired lab technician who had worked most of her life at a local medical research facility. Her co-workers remembered her as disciplined and precise, with a fascination for animals that bordered on obsession. After retiring early, she poured her savings into building an enclosure for two young chimpanzees she had adopted from a private exotic pet dealer. She named them Buddy and Rosie, a male and female she'd raised since infancy. To Linda, they were family. She fed them breakfast cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them sit in the living room to watch television through the screen door. Her brother, Tom Reeves, visited weekly. He loved her, but worried constantly. The chimps, once under 70 pounds, had grown fast. Buddy now weighed over 130, his arms thick and muscular, while Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are strong beyond proportion, 5 times the upper body strength of an adult man. Males can weigh over 150 pounds, their jaws capable of shattering bone with a bite force near 1,200 pounds per square inch. In the wild, they display bursts of extreme aggression when agitated or competing for dominance, targeting the face, hands, and genitals of their opponents. Captivity often amplifies these instincts, especially when confinement or frustration builds. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. It was routine now. Feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. That Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. On that day, Linda carried a plastic bowl filled with banana slices and apples into the enclosure. Tom stood by the porch, watching her through the screen. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a flat rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty pant hoot, was different from his usual play noise. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward onto the concrete. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, one hand on her shoulder, the other tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and froze for a second before fumbling for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting into the phone for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. Linda tried to crawl toward the gate, blood pooling beneath her. Buddy grabbed her by the hair, dragging her back. He bit her neck once, then again, each time slower, deliberate. Her body stiffened, then slackened. Rosie backed away slightly, lips curled, hands trembling. The attack lasted less than a minute, but to Tom, it stretched endlessly. The sound of skin tearing replaced only by his own shouting. By the time deputies arrived about 10 minutes later, the yard was silent. The chimp stood near the body, panting. Buddy had blood on his hands and chest. Rosie sat beside the gate, rocking slightly. Officers attempted to use tranquilizers, but Buddy charged the fence, snapping at the air. A deputy then fired 2 rifle rounds through the bars, hitting him in the chest and neck. Both animals fell inside the enclosure, their bodies still twitching when Tom was led away by paramedics. Deputies found Linda near the center of the cage. She had suffered massive trauma, scalp avulsion, facial disfigurement, and multiple fractures. Her pulse was gone before help arrived. Investigators noted that the outer gate had not been locked, a lapse in Linda's usually strict routine. Tom refused interviews. He moved away within months, leaving the house empty and the enclosure to rust behind tall weeds. At the funeral, held quietly in a mobile chapel, a few former co-workers attended. They remembered Linda as gentle and curious, but behind the condolences lingered a shared disbelief that a bond built over years could turn fatal in seconds. The enclosure was later dismantled, leaving only a bare patch of concrete, stained faintly dark where the hose couldn't wash everything away. It was April 17, 2015, just outside Chicago, Illinois. The afternoon was bright and warm as yellow school buses pulled into the parking lot of a small private animal park, a roadside zoo with fading paint on its signs and rust showing through its old fences. Families with strollers mixed with school groups carrying packed lunches. Teachers with clipboards tried to keep order as students pointed at parrots, goats, and monkeys in cramped pens. The chimpanzee exhibit sat near the middle of the park, behind a low chain-link railing and a shallow moat lined with algae. A hand-painted sign read, "No climbing or leaning on fence." Inside the enclosure, 2 adult males and 1 younger female lived together among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture stains, and the enclosure looked outdated compared to the modern habitats seen in larger accredited zoos. Matthew Collins was 12 years old, a 6th grader from a public school on a spring field trip. His mother worked night shifts as a nurse, and his father operated a forklift at a local warehouse. They didn't travel much, but Matthew loved animals and never missed a chance to see them up close. His teachers described him as bright but impulsive, a boy who liked to climb trees, rooftops, or anything taller than himself. At the park, he carried a second-hand digital camera he'd saved for by helping neighbors mow lawns. His plan was simple: get the best photos of the chimps out of anyone in his class. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclosure. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the sour trace of leftover feed. The students crowded against the metal barrier, talking and laughing while their teacher gave instructions. Matthew, standing near the back, raised his camera but couldn't get a clear view past the others. Wanting a better angle, he stepped onto the lower rail for balance as a few classmates noticed and motioned for him to stop. He ignored them, focused on his shot, and leaned forward. The railing was slick with humidity, and the ledge beneath his shoe gave slightly. As he leaned forward to center the chimps in frame, his foot slipped. A few students gasped as his arms windmilled for balance. Then he dropped over the rail and into the pit below. He landed hard on his right side, rolling onto his stomach with a groan. From above, teachers screamed his name. A few kids started crying. For a moment, the enclosure was silent except for the soft panting of the chimps. Then one of the males, an older, broad-shouldered chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling with tension. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started toward the boy. The younger male followed, puffing air through his lips in short bursts. Visitors who were close enough later said the sounds were chilling, deep hoots that rose in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The 2 chimps stopped about 10 feet away, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the strange figure that had dropped into their space. Bo took 2 quick steps forward and grabbed a fistful of Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was iron. Bo's first strike wasn't a feeding bite, it was a dominance blow, a sharp smack to the side of the head that knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite, a hard, fast clamp on the arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in from the other side, pulling at the boy's sleeve and striking his shoulder. The sounds of hitting and tearing mixed with hoots and panicked screams from above. A zookeeper stationed near a nearby enclosure heard the commotion and ran toward the enclosure, shouting for the crowd to move back. He grabbed a hose from the maintenance shed and sprayed into the pit, the high-pressure stream breaking the chimp's focus for seconds at a time. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again, stopping inches from the water spray. The younger male backed away, pacing in circles while pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the 2 chimps alternated between lunging and retreating as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt and retreated toward the back wall, hooting loudly as he went. Staff rushed in with stretchers the moment the animals were secured in their holding cages. Matthew lay face up, motionless except for shallow breaths. His right arm was badly lacerated, with deep puncture wounds near the elbow and wrist. There were facial injuries consistent with blunt force strikes and a bite near his cheekbone. Paramedics worked to stabilize him, but he went into cardiac arrest before they reached the hospital. He was pronounced dead on arrival, his injuries too severe from blood loss and trauma. Authorities launched an investigation within hours. Inspectors found the barrier around the enclosure didn't meet state standards for height or secondary containment. The park, already cited twice in previous years for safety violations, lacked a formal emergency response team. Officials determined that a combination of poor infrastructure and human error had allowed the accident to turn fatal. In the following week, grief counselors visited Matthew's school. Several students who had witnessed the fall reported nightmares and panic at loud noises. The animal park temporarily closed the chimp exhibit, promising stronger barriers and clearer supervision protocols. It was June 11th, 2014, in Stamford, Connecticut. The afternoon was quiet except for the sound of lawnmowers and cars passing through the neighborhood. Houses lined Rockledge Drive in neat rows, each with trimmed lawns and small front porches. Inside one of these homes, a woman was about to face an attack that would shock the entire community. The house looked ordinary from the outside, but what lived inside made it different from every other home on the block. Belinda Holmes was 57 years old and had lived in Stamford most of her life. She worked part-time at an insurance office, but was better known to neighbors for keeping an unusual companion. She owned a male chimpanzee named Charlie. Belinda had gotten Charlie as an infant years earlier, ignoring state laws that banned private ownership of such animals. She raised him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, and driving him around in her car. Friends said she was devoted to him and believed she could control him the way others controlled pets. For years, Charlie was a local spectacle. Children stared when he looked out the windows. Neighbors watched Belinda walk him on a leash through the yard. She treated him like family and defended him whenever anyone expressed concern. But there were warning signs. Charlie had grown much larger over the years. By age 12, he weighed over 120 pounds. Belinda struggled to hold him back when he became upset, but she insisted he was gentle and misunderstood. The house showed years of living with the animal. Furniture was scratched and damaged from his climbing. The air often smelled of animal musk. Charlie moved freely through the rooms, from the kitchen to the living room, to the small backyard. On this June day, the weather was warm and the windows were open. Charlie grew restless, pacing and making noise as Belinda tried to calm him with fruit and snacks. Years of living in a human household had not removed Charlie's natural instincts. When stressed or frustrated, a chimpanzee's aggression can surface suddenly, with violence that no amount of familiarity can prevent. There had been warnings before. Months earlier, a neighbor called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard. He chased cars and pounded on a vehicle before Belinda brought him back inside. State officials reminded her that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends noticed that Charlie became irritable around strangers, but Belinda continued to insist he was harmless. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was clear. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, and showed his teeth. Belinda moved closer to grab his arm. The attack started in seconds. Charlie lunged forward and slammed Belinda backward into the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face with terrible force. Neighbors heard the noise through the open windows. Furniture crashed, and Belinda screamed. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to protect herself. Blood pooled quickly across the carpet as he continued the assault with relentless strength. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He hit her with his fists, then bit into her forearm and broke the bone. Her screams brought neighbors running to the house. One man tried the door but stopped when he looked through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbors backed away and called 911, their voices shaking as they described what was happening. Police arrived within minutes. Officers walking toward the front door heard the chimp screeching and Belinda crying. Through the glass, they saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, officers decided they had to act. Officers fired multiple shots, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Charlie collapsed in the living room on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely awake, her face destroyed and her hands mangled. Paramedics worked quickly, but the damage was severe. She was airlifted to a trauma center with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands requiring amputation, and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was flipped over, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. Neighbors gathered outside, shaken by what they had seen. They told reporters the screams would stay with them forever. Belinda survived, but her life changed completely. She went through multiple surgeries and was left disfigured and needing constant care. The case sparked national attention about the dangers of keeping exotic animals as pets. Connecticut lawmakers passed stricter laws and banned private chimpanzee ownership entirely. The house was eventually sold. The new owners knew the story tied to the property. It was May 28, 2017, on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. Along a bend of the Colorado River, a few families had gathered for a Memorial Day barbecue at a privately rented picnic site, a quiet patch of grass bordered by live oaks and open water. Cars were parked along the dirt access road, and children played near the grills while adults unpacked food in folding chairs. The afternoon heat shimmered off the water. Near a cluster of tables by the riverbank, one guest had brought an animal most people only ever saw behind glass. The victim was 36-year-old Daniel Ortiz, a high school track coach who lived a few miles away. He ran the trail most weekends and met friends for cookouts when the weather was clear. Known for his steadiness, Daniel was the kind who brought extra water and sunscreen for anyone who forgot. That day, he had finished a 5-mile loop and stopped by the gathering after a friend texted about the riverside barbecue. He noticed the small crowd near the tables and walked over out of curiosity. Daniel had reasons to feel comfortable around animals. He volunteered at a local shelter and had helped calm anxious dogs before adoption events. He kept a respectful distance, staying behind a low trash can and maintaining space. The chimp wore a harness, and the owner talked with onlookers while handing out small pieces of fruit. Daniel wanted one clear photo to show his students, proof of the strange thing he saw on a normal Sunday. He moved forward a few feet, holding his phone out and angling for a clean shot past the cluster of people. The scene was ordinary in every other way. The chimp shifted constantly, pacing a small circle on the leash, sniffing the air, and reaching toward anything held too close. A thin musk drifted downwind, mixing with charcoal smoke from nearby grills. Adult male chimpanzees are not suited for public gatherings. In social groups, dominance is enforced with sudden violence. Years of human handling do not erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, and food competition can bring them to the surface in seconds. A city ordinance banned exotic animals within Austin limits, but this site lay just beyond municipal oversight. Few people at the event realized the handler lacked the proper permits. A couple near the front stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler holding a bright red cup. The owner shortened the leash but kept feeding bits of fruit. A runner passing along the dirt road called out that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, and waited for the chimp to settle so he could take one steady shot. The tension increased by inches. Children clustered too close, then were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry from a paper plate and grunted, eyes fixed on moving hands and faces. The owner tugged the leash, which had slackened around his wrist. Daniel stepped a little closer, maybe 2 feet forward, to avoid another person's shoulder in his frame. The chimp wheeled toward the movement. For a beat, everything held still except the wind. The lunge covered the gap in a blur of dark arms and bared teeth. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. The phone flew from his grip, skidding across the dirt. The first bite hit his forearm just below the elbow, tearing skin and muscle. Daniel stumbled backward onto the edge of a blanket, trying to pull free. The chimp's grip did not loosen. A second bite tore into the back of his hand. Screams rose from the crowd. The chimp dragged Daniel down, weight pinning him on his side. Daniel tried to roll and get his feet under him, but the chimp climbed up his torso and hammered his shoulder with fists. The leash tangled with the owner's legs, causing him to fall. In the scramble, the leash slackened again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head with both hands, and bit into his cheek. Blood pooled in the grass, soaking the corner of a blanket and streaking the chimp's face. Attempts to intervene failed in rapid succession. A man kicked at the chimp's hip, but the chimp swung one arm without looking and knocked him off balance. Another tried to shove the animal with a folding chair. The chimp ducked and landed another bite on Daniel's face. The sounds were distinct and awful. Wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, high-pitched shrieks from the animal, and short grunts from Daniel every time teeth met bone. A woman dragged 2 children backward by their shirts as the owner crawled toward the leash, hands shaking. The attack slowed when the owner managed to loop the leash under the chimp's chest and pull it toward a picnic table leg. creating a brief barrier. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally losing strength. Daniel's movements weakened. He tried to lift an arm, but another bite to the wrist broke a bone with a sharp crack. Bystanders threw bottles and tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but nothing worked. Emergency calls went out within seconds, yet the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight around its torso. Daniel lay a few feet away, motionless on the trampled grass, and the chimp was sedated and lifted into a transport cage. By dusk, only tire tracks and a few torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sounds that had filled the clearing hours earlier. It was September 14th, 2018, in Los Angeles, California. The morning sun cut across the lot of a small, independent production studio, tucked between warehouses and sound stages. Crew members wheeled carts of lighting equipment into place while cameras were arranged around a staged living room set. The segment was meant to be simple, an animal demonstration for a daytime talk show, filmed by a local affiliate. The chimpanzee brought in for the shoot had been trained for years, but the pressure of lights, heat, and dozens of unfamiliar people in close quarters would prove too much. Kevin Harris, 41, was an experienced exotic animal trainer who'd spent 2 decades working small contracts across the state. He'd built his career on patience and consistency, teaching wild species to tolerate human environments through gradual conditioning. The jobs were steady, but not glamorous. School assemblies, local commercials, and small TV projects. This appearance was just another paycheck and a chance to promote his business. The chimp, a 13-year-old named Mike, had worked with Kevin since infancy. At 125 pounds, Mike was fully mature, strong, intelligent, and unpredictable when stressed. Kevin often said the animal knew the rhythm of production life, that he could stay calm under noise and movement. But handlers familiar with chimps knew the truth. Adulthood changes everything. Males that once tolerated crowds often grew volatile once dominance instincts sharpened with age. The set itself was modest, a sofa, coffee table, and painted backdrop beneath a grid of hot studio lamps. Crew members adjusted wiring and sound booms while the host reviewed her lines. Mike sat on a low stool beside Kevin, wearing only a light collar and leash. He shifted constantly, tugging at the strap and scanning the unfamiliar faces. Before cameras rolled, an animal safety coordinator, a consultant required for shoots involving live animals, suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing stress behaviors, pacing, baring teeth, and tugging sharply on the lead. But the director insisted they proceed. The schedule was tight, and sunlight from the windows was already shifting. Kevin reassured everyone it was fine, offering Mike small pieces of banana to settle him. The tension seemed to fade, at least for the moment. As recording began, the room brightened under the lamps. The host smiled for the opening shot, reading lines about wildlife awareness. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave, a trick they'd rehearsed countless times. For a few seconds, everything worked. Then the boom microphone dipped low, casting a shadow that swept across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly, shoulders hunched, lips curled. A low pant hoot echoed off the walls. Kevin turned toward him, voice low, reaching out to calm him. That brief touch broke the balance. The chimp lunged sideways. The leash snapped tight as Kevin fell backward, the stool clattering across the floor. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room filled with noise, shouts, hoots, the crash of equipment tipping over. A sound technician stumbled into a light stand. Someone yelled to cut the power. Kevin tried to shield his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm just below the elbow. The bite tore muscle and tendons clean through. Blood sprayed across the carpet as Kevin twisted, trying to free himself. The chimp released and struck again. Another bite to the shoulder, another blow with his fists. The host ran off set. Crew members screamed for security. One man swung a tripod to break the attack, but Mike dodged, gripping Kevin's shirt and dragging him toward the wall. The impact cracked one of the camera housings. The chimp's shrieks grew higher, rhythmic and mechanical. Each sound matched to a strike or bite. Kevin's movements slowed. His left arm hung limp. A second crew member threw a fire extinguisher. The spray clouded the air, coating the floor in white dust. Mike released for a moment, then turned toward the noise, baring teeth streaked with red. Security burst in, one man carrying another extinguisher, another holding a collapsible baton. The first blast of powder hit Mike square in the chest. He reared back. The second spray pushed him farther away from Kevin, who lay motionless on the floor. Animal control officers arrived within minutes, summoned by the studio's emergency call. They tranquilized Mike on sight, the dart striking his shoulder as he bared his teeth. He staggered briefly before collapsing beside the toppled couch, eyes fluttering. Kevin survived, but barely. Paramedics stabilized him before rushing him to a trauma center. Surgeons later documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, and severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The production shut down indefinitely. The footage was never aired. In the aftermath, investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost, one he would spend the rest of his life recovering from. It was October 9th, 2019, along the Kampala-Fort Portal Highway in western Uganda. The two-lane road curved through steep, forested hillsides, with trucks grinding gears uphill and motorbikes weaving past them. The road was a lifeline between towns, but for wildlife whose habitat had been divided by asphalt, it had become a dangerous crossing. Martin Blake was a 48-year-old American wildlife photographer traveling alone. He had spent 2 weeks documenting primates in East Africa and wanted one last series of images before flying home. Known for chasing difficult shots, he often left marked trails to capture animals in unusual settings. That morning, he drove west out of Fort Portal and stopped where the highway cut clean through forest slopes. He had heard stories of chimpanzees appearing at roadside clearings and hoped to photograph one against the backdrop of the mountain road. Martin had experience in the field, having photographed gorillas and monkeys before, but his drive for unique images sometimes pushed him close to risk. He parked in a gravel turnout near a bend, slung his camera over his shoulder, and began walking along the shoulder. A passing motorbike rider shouted at him in the local language, gesturing toward the trees, but Martin only waved back and kept moving. To him, the danger seemed less about animals and more about trucks speeding around blind corners. The highway cut sharply through green ridges, with walls of vegetation pressing close to the road. Traffic passed in bursts, leaving long stretches of silence except for the forest's background noise. On one side, a red dirt slope rose nearly 20 feet, with vines draping down. On the other hand, trees leaned low over a drop into dense undergrowth. It was along these margins that chimpanzees sometimes appeared. They could climb easily across embankments or descend into the ditches that lined the road. In their shrinking habitat, the edge of the asphalt became another boundary to patrol. When startled or challenged, aggression was their first response. Rangers at Kabale's visitor center often told tourists to stay inside vehicles when driving the forest roads. Truck drivers reported occasional sightings of chimps near bends where fruit trees grew close to the highway. Locals avoided walking alone along that stretch, especially in the morning when animals were most active. Martin had been told as much at his lodge the night before. He dismissed it, reasoning that he had worked safely around gorillas under stricter conditions. A few minutes into his walk, Martin saw movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge of the slope. Behind him, two smaller chimps lingered in the plants. Martin raised his camera, crouching low at the shoulder for a clear angle. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The two younger chimps retreated into cover, but the male stood his ground, hooting sharply. Martin kept clicking, zooming in for a close shot. He stepped forward into the lane, unaware that the chimp had begun to climb down toward him. The descent took only seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt with a heavy thud, closing the gap on all fours. Martin lowered the camera just as the animal charged, dark arms swinging with sudden speed. The first impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding across the pavement. The chimp seized his left arm and dragged him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace with his feet, but the strength difference was overwhelming. The first bite clamped onto his forearm, tearing skin and muscle. A passing motorbike braked hard, the rider shouting as he watched. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head with fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled quickly on the gravel shoulder, running into the ditch. The younger chimps appeared briefly from the tree line, hooting and circling, before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, pulling at his clothes and biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones from the roadside, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll weakly onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds were raw. The rasp of Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel as the struggle shifted back and forth. The assault lasted only a few minutes, though to the witnesses it felt far longer, before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp released and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and Martin was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, locals tried to keep pressure on his wounds as the truck sped toward Fort Portal. He lost consciousness within minutes. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors at the hospital confirmed he was dead on arrival. His camera bag held memory cards with his last images: the forest edge, the red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.